Thank you all for the warm welcome. Really appreciate it. Just a little bit about myself. Let me grab the clicker. Today we're going to cover quite a bit in this session. I know you just had lunch, so I don't want you to fall asleep on me. So we have a couple different things going on. One was the diversity, like rating where Sonic falls in terms of EEOC and the MFHA, and I will cover those in just a bit. And then also, we are going to talk about the foundation of diversity and inclusion. What is diversity, what is inclusion, and what does it mean for Sonic? Also, I will cover benchmarking and statistics, and you have two documents in front of you. You can flip through those as I'm talking if you'd like, or just wait until we cover them. One is a benchmarking data, and then one is Sonic's D&I plan so far. It's, again, a draft plan. So those are in front of you. Our breakout activity is going to be a SWOT analysis on diversity and inclusion, and I'll explain that in a bit as well. And then also, we need your help. So you are going to, in this group, build a brand statement for diversity and inclusion. And hopefully this is something that whatever comes out of this group here is going to be communicated to the public. So some really important things for you to do after lunch. Glad it was not heavy. So as Anita mentioned a little bit about me, you have some information also in your learning journals. But I just want to open this up with a story. Cliff this morning talked about the United States and what an amazing place it is, and also just different trends that were going on in terms of the U.S. So my personal story is, I think, important not just to diversity but also to the U.S. I was born in Kuwait. I was raised in the Middle East. I actually was raised in Saudi Arabia. Bless you. And Arabic was my first language. In fact, I grew up watching the Muppets speak in Arabic. And it's true, Kermit would say, Ahlan wa sahlan, kayfa halik. You know, they'd just talk in Arabic. Now, that's not even the funny part. The funny part is that Miss Piggy was not present. Do you know why? Pork. Muslims don't do bacon. So no Miss Piggy, which I didn't realize till I moved to the U.S. that, number one, they speak English. I was like, what? Who knew? And then the second thing is, Miss Piggy is just about the funniest part that was missing out of my life. So I've been ripped off as I grew up. I lived in the United Arab Emirates. I've also lived in England, and I went to school in Pakistan. And so English is actually my third language. I've lost Arabic in the meantime, just because I was a very confused child. And so I speak Urdu and Hindi fluently. And then when I came to the U.S., though, imagine somebody coming from a third world country as an immigrant. I was 10 years old when I moved here. And we were put right in New York City. It's like going to a different planet. And what's so interesting in terms of diversity is that that's the first time I ever saw a Chinese person speak fluent English. Because in Pakistan, you have Chinese people right from China who only speak Chinese. So I came from a very homogenous background. Pakistanis were in Pakistan, Arabs were in Saudi Arabia, and then the Middle East. And then you get to New York City, where the whole world exists all at one time. And you can hear multiple languages being spoken to you at one time. So it's very exhilarating. Right after New York, my dad got a job in California. So we moved to Market Street in San Francisco. So from one crazy city to another crazy city. And so that was my introduction to the U.S. So I was a little bit biased, I guess, in the way that I look at things because of these huge cross-cultural contexts. And even within the United States, you have so many co-cultures that are existing from coast to coast. So that's my background as far as moving to the U.S. Now, I have to tell you another thing. When I moved to California, people would ask me, they would say, now, where are you from? And I would say, well, I'm from Pakistan. And they'd say, no, you're not. I'd say, well, what do you mean? Because a lot of people didn't know where Pakistan was at that point in time. There was no 9/11 or Taliban and things like that. And so now they know. unfortunately. But then a lot of people basically thought that I was Mexican. So in California, I became fluent in Spanish. So I was like, hey, can't beat them, join them. So anyway, so that's my background as far as moving around from place to place. And then as Anita mentioned, I did HR and diversity for Campbell Soup Company. My job was good. Yeah, okay, I'm getting just a couple laughs, so I'm putting you to sleep already. There's a couple more. Thank you for that. As soon as you start throwing some of those grilled tomatoes from lunch at me, I'll know to get off the stage. I currently teach cultural diversity at the undergrad level at multiple organizations and also for State of Oklahoma and college. So that's quite a bit more about me than you probably even needed to know. I want to start off with a quote here. I believe that companies that figure out the diversity challenge first will clearly have a competitive advantage. And this is from the CEO of Pepsico in the Wall Street Journal. So Pepsi and Coke are getting ready to host a huge forum on diversity. It's going to be, I believe, in April. And what they're doing is taking a look at it from some of the things that Cliff mentioned with your key priorities for Sonic, to say, is this something that is a customer-based issue? Is it something that can help us in our corporate strategy? And in your packets, I have the PepsiCo diversity initiative so that you have an opportunity to look at that. There were also a couple pre-reads that were given to you, and I know from what Jennifer and Jessica and Anita have told me about the awesome Sonic staff, each one of you have already read that. Safe assumption to make? I don't know. But in the pre-reads, there are different companies and statistics that I'm going to be referencing as well. So the first thing that I want to show you is a video, and it is by Deloitte. And again, it's in one of the company articles. So if you could cue the Deloitte video, it's the first. Awesome, thank you. So diversity, it's an emotionally loaded, challenging word. Inclusion becomes a part of diversity so that it can take a little bit of that initial reaction off. Inclusion is something that needs to be clearly defined. And that is one of the things that we have talked about in that steering committee for diversity and inclusion. How do we not only tackle diversity as it's explained by law, but how do we bring that inclusion piece so that every single person at the Sonic team, franchise and customers feels valued? And that really, over the today and tomorrow, those are the two main questions. How do we bring diversity and inclusion as a part of the strategic plan? And then the second piece is, how do we embed value into those two terms so that you don't get that knee-jerk gut feel off of it? I do training for the state of Oklahoma, and one of the things I mention right up front, just to get people off, just sometimes you walk in and you're thinking, oh, diversity, oh Lord, what am I going to do with this? And one of the things that I tell people to unarm them is that diversity is not a secret code that says we need less white males. It's not. But sometimes with legal implications like the EEOC, affirmative action, those kinds of things bring that up to the surface, and that's what people kind of walk in thinking. So I said this just last week at a State of Oklahoma training, and I mentioned that not only is it not like a hidden agenda to get rid of white males, but it's also shouldn't be a punitive thing like, uh-oh, who got into trouble? We're having diversity training now. And so seriously, a man came up to me right after that during a break, and he said, how did you know? And I said, what do you mean? He said, I totally got busted. I have 2 EEOC complaints. And one of the things was they said, guess what, Bob? You're going to diversity training. So he said, I'm happy actually to hear you say it's not a punitive thing. So what is it? I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what is it. And you will have a chance to define that for Sonic. The reason why it's so complicated is because, as you saw in the video, it means different things for different people. I want to share a couple things that the video also brings up. So one of the things that I noticed is that in the EEOC, everyone was able to just go down there and say, okay, these are how we feel Sonic is rated on these types of categories. And then things got a little bit confusing, a little bit more complicated when we went to the MFHA guidelines. And people were saying, well, what customers? Well, what workforce? How do we know? How do we know what they look like? What do we say? And honestly, that's on purpose. It's because you deal with 2 types of diversity, what we see and what we don't see. So what's known and what's unknown. Tomorrow in the session, we're going to talk about the diversity iceberg. There are things that you can see right up off the bat. Those are those right there. It's age, ethnicity or national origin, it's race and color, religion, and sex. And really, religion, unless somebody's wearing a cross or a burqa or something like that, you won't really be able to guess a lot of times. So that one even falls in the invisible realm. So that's why some of these things get a little bit more sticky and a bit more complicated. So known and unknown. 2 more terms that I want to discuss with you. Diversity and university. Ever wonder about these terms like uni and die? What is the meaning behind all of this? Diversity, the prefix here is DI, which is the same thing as divide. It means to separate out. So what you're trying to do in diversity is separate out from many. University, like in colleges and schools, teaches that you take a lot and you bring it into one discipline. One out of many. In fact, if you have a dollar bill, take it out. What's on the back of it? Anybody know offhand? Excellent. E pluribus unum. Anybody know what that means? U.S. History 101. It means out of many, one. And so the U.S., and this is why I wanted to start off with my history, to say the United States, this is a part of our history. And so out of many, you get one. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So in those graded flip charts up there, if you take a look, I tried to circle where some of the scatter plot fell. And in age, it shows that we have a strength. So it seems there's quite a bit of diversity of age. In national origin, it's all over the map. In race and color, looks like it's leaning more towards an opportunity. Same with religion. In sex, it's right in the middle, and I'll share a couple statistics with you about Sonic in just a minute. In the workforce, it's everywhere. Same thing with community. With customers, it looks like it's a strength, but with suppliers, the plot reverses, and it looks like it could be more of an opportunity. So I think it's kind of interesting to take a look and see where most people fell. And if you look, it's fairly well concentrated. So at least you are all together when it comes to these. Let me cover a little bit of stats with you here. As I mentioned, the definition of diversity is evolving. It continues to change. Alex is going to talk about millennials in just a bit. Millennials don't want a definition of diversity. They don't even want it to be defined. They don't want a diversity policy. So what is it they want? Well, I hope that she'll answer that because I have some teenagers at home, and I sure could use an answer. But millennials want a company with soul. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know. So in your pre-reads, there is an article that says why diversity and inclusion will be a top priority in 2016. It actually addresses what it means to be a company with soul, and it defines diversity in there for you. So a couple definitions here off of the internet. For Johnson & Johnson, diversity means more than boosting numbers of minority workers. It's just as crucial to recognize the unique perspectives that each employee brings. Same thing you saw in the video from Deloitte organization. And then a quote from Deloitte. In addition to creating workplace inclusive of race, gender, and sexual orientation, to name a few, many organizations are now seeking value in something even simpler, diversity of thought. I love that definition. So it takes it from just these things that are legally required to saying, hey, we could use just a different way of thinking about things. So PricewaterhouseCoopers defines diversity as confronting hard realities and then doing something about it. And then I have from the Yum brands, which my kids call Kentaco Hut, they say, believe in all people. They underscore the importance of actively seeking diversity in others, believing everyone has the potential to make a difference, coaching, supporting every individual to grow to their full capacity. Sounds more like a mission statement than really a diversity and inclusion statement, but now I hope you're catching my drift. It's not so much about the EEOC or legal guidelines anymore. It is more about bringing differences. It's that differences that come together as one and make it a really, really special place with soul. So SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, did a survey of Fortune 1000 companies, and they found that 75% of diversity initiatives were focused on recruiting, 19.5% had little to no formal D&I strategy. 50% had staff that was exclusively dedicated to diversity and inclusion. Now, with the D&I team, we've actually had an opportunity to not just benchmark and see what other organizations are doing or not doing. And in the benchmarking data, go ahead and just flip to that. Let's go through it real quick. You'll see Pepsico is one of the first ones. Pepsi has seriously about 10 pages on diversity. They are crazy on it. They have it broken down from customers, suppliers, men, women, all kinds of other things. You have Hershey's Corporation as well, and we thought that was really neat to share that because each one of their little kisses represents a diverse community. And one of the things I noticed is that, you know, it's interesting that Sonic wants to talk about diversity because honestly, I'm one of those people who, when I pull up to Sonic, I know what I want, and it's usually a cherry limeade with tater tots, like cheesy tots. And I know what I want, and it's usually the same thing every time. But Sonic has so much diversity in their drink menu. Why don't you have diversity within your organization? That's one of the questions that we came up with, to say, if you have diversity in what you present outwards to the public, does your employee base show that same diversity? Following, there's also the Yum brands. There is Campbell Soup Company, whose diversity initiative I helped with personally, so I have a personal stake in that one. That's why it's part of it's just a personal ad for me in there. And then also, if you notice, Whataburger and Dairy Queen have nothing. So when Cliff put up all your competitors on the bottom, you will find that many of your competitors still do not have a D&I inclusion strategy. So you are not behind by any means. I do believe Sonic is on the cutting edge of diversity and inclusion, and we always have room to grow. So a couple stats I wanted to share also, because this is where some of these things come up, and John Budd is the one who said, hey, we need to make sure we have some stats up here because it's important to take a look at what the United States is doing and where Oklahoma ranks. So these are the last US Census stats, and this is white, basically non-ethnic, just self-identifying as white. 72% in Oklahoma is right at 72% as well. Hispanic is 14.5%. Oklahoma, surprisingly, even though we're close to Texas, which is another country, we are at 9.8% instead of 14.5%, which is national average. Black is 12.8%. Oklahoma is at 7.7%. Asian, 4.4%. We're at half at 2.1%. Native is 0.8%. And it's shocking, even with all the Trail of Tears and reservations that we have in Oklahoma, we're still at 0.2%. And so I think it's really interesting to take a look at some of the statistics that exist with the United States and also with the state of Oklahoma. Our median age as a country is 36.4. Bless you. And so with Sonic, Sonic's diversity is actually surprising. Sonic, in terms of minority population, is at about 15%, whereas national average is a lot higher, 28%. And so Sonic is doing pretty well in terms of representing minority. And I have another video at the end that's going to show you how that compares with Silicon Valley in California, where you think everybody is up to date and really going well with that. So let's take a look at top initiatives from some of the pre-reads as well. These come from the pre-read that is why diversity and inclusion will be a top priority. And in there, they found that diversity efforts actually increased diversity within the organization by 75%, recruiting efforts did. Diversity training initiatives, education and efforts are 66%. Community outreach is 61%. And the lower end of the range is 11% stated that their organizations offered literacy training, which is something we forget about sometimes, educational status. And then about 20%, 19% indicated that the organizations have very informal structures or nothing at all. So that's that previous 19.5%. A study done by Harvard, it's a huge white paper, they found that top 50 diversity organizations, these are companies that specifically emphasize diversity as a part of an integrated corporate strategy, had profit margins of 2.7% over their counterparts. Now, with the 6 key indicators, I noticed that it was talking about an ROI of 15 to 18%, and then also an overall increase of 3%. Diversity is measurable. You can actually give and get hard numbers through diversity programs and initiatives if they're done well. And that's another task for the D&I steering team to say, how do we measure this? How do we link it up with corporate initiatives? And then how do we keep track and see how it gets tied into increasing that overall profit margin? So Deloitte, again, is on cutting edge of diversity. They did another huge study that they took a look at 450 global companies, and they found 31 magic dimensions. They found that people in the highest level were 2.3 times, they presented a 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee over a 3-year period. There were 2 critical components out of those 31 magic components. They were directly tied to diversity and inclusion. They were actually higher, D&I, diversity and inclusion, was rated higher than organizational structure, higher than organizational goal setting, and also higher than performance management. It's surprising because we spend a lot of time tied around with performance management and seeing how employees are doing. Are they performing well? Are they matching up with their skill set? And instead, what they're finding with these top-tier companies is if you're hiring a diverse workforce, it really starts at that recruitment and hiring level. And that's where you get that performance outcome. Just want to take a moment to identify and also to introduce who is on this diversity and inclusion team that I keep talking about. So Anita, since you're standing up, I'm just going to ask you to keep standing up. And if you'll just please as I introduce you, if you'll stand. Anita, Alexis, is Alexis in here? No? Okay. Kathy Harrell, Kathy. Christy Woodworth, Derek, no. Jennifer Buxton, in the back. Jessica Sheets, there she is. John Budd, Kristen Ferguson, oh, that's right, she's out. Michelle Varian, there you are. And then Tanisha Beecham. Thank you, and let's give them all a round of applause. The second packet that you see in front of you is what the diversity and inclusion team has been working on. And I want to remind all of you that this team started meeting November 10th. So this is just very, very recent. This is not something that they've been working at for years and years. So to be able to put something like this together actually takes quite a long time. The team came together and was very focused. In fact, they were laser focused on what they wanted to see and what they wanted to review. And so the D&I initiative so far, you'll see in the packets, and I'll give you some time in just a bit to go through that in more detail. It includes the diversity and inclusion team efforts, the recruitment strategy and goals for fiscal year 2016 and also 2017, Strategies and goals, those are the last 2 pages, and then the work in progress. So there is a mission statement, a vision statement that's been created for diversity and inclusion, and also goals and objectives for the next year, and also we're in process now of doing the next 3 years. But this discussion is actually going to help us to, again, fine-tune that discussion a little bit more as well. So in terms of other people and what they're doing, influence of diversity on innovation and competition, Pepsi has introduced Gatorade Extremo and guacamole Doritos. Those are just some examples of what some other companies are doing. There are so many advantages of including diversity as a component of your organization's strategies. There are benefits to receiving diverse perspectives and to improve problem-solving capabilities, and also risk management. You're going to talk about workplace violence in upcoming sessions. Diversity and inclusion actually impacts that as well, so it's not a standalone. The need to incorporate diversity into succession planning is, again, another part of that recruitment, hiring, retention plan. And I just want to share this also with you. I had a chance to have a conversation with a woman who's seated next to me in an airplane. I'm really nosy. And so, you buckle in and that person can't go anywhere. So I've got captive audience. And so she had her laptop open and I was kind of peeking over, just, trying to mind my own business. So I just couldn't. And all of a sudden I saw this slide after slide after slide on diversity. And so I thought, oh, perfect. So I asked her, I said, so now what do you do? Do you teach diversity? And she said, no, I'm getting ready to speak at a conference on diversity. And I said, well, that's funny because that's what I do. I talk about diversity and help organizations with diversity and inclusion practices. And so we got to talking. She's from Coke. And we were flying from Oklahoma City to Atlanta. And she's going to do basically a leadership summit for Coke. And what she had just found in those slides were focus group results from customer base. They're coming out with Thai chili pepper Coke. So interesting. They're coming out with bacon flavored Coke because, bacon's good with everything, right? And so they are really on the cutting edge of quite a bit of information. I asked her what she does, and she was in charge of the Minute Maid products. And so she was all excited about this huge focus group that she had done. They found that their Naked brand, it's like smoothies and Minute Maid product juices. She said, we have narrowed down the focus market on those. She said, do you want to know who they are? And I said, no. She goes, it's women like you. And I was like, oh, goodness, what does that mean? She said, there are women in their 40s, multiple kids who don't have a chance to eat a meal, so they grab and go. And then she said the Minute Maid juice boxes are, of course, for soccer field moms, because that's kind of what they give out. So they were very specific in the way that not just by age, by demographic, by sex, gender, everything. So we had a chance to just talk about some of these things. So not only do they have diversity as an initiative corporate-wide, they have it and it comes out to their products as well. So a couple things, and this is something that I'd like you to just take a look at real quick, is what do you want to measure as Sonic? Who is responsible for achieving diversity goals? And are those assignments clearly made? How do we assess and document the links then between diversity initiative and the organizational performance? Now you get a chance to actually do two things. One of the first things I'd like you to do is that we have these post-it tabletop pads, right? One for each in front of you, one for each table. On there, if you could do a SWOT analysis real quick of the diversity and inclusion plan that's there, and then use that information to say, let's take a look and see what is Sonic doing. And your brand statement should answer the following things. Who are we? What are we passionate about? What do we care about deeply? How do we make things happen? And what are we saying to the outside world? What's our strategy? So 2 things. One is a SWOT, real quick, on what you see in the diversity inclusion plan. And whatever you see from there, take a look and talk within your groups to come up with a 1 to 2 sentence statement about who Sonic is and what you feel or value about diversity. So myself, Jennifer, and a couple others will rotate around and just see. You have about 10 minutes to do this at your tables. I just wanted to comment on a couple things that I noticed and observed in the tables. Some of you follow directions, and some of you are very diverse in thought, which I applaud. I love that. So that was a short time to get you to do quite a bit of information. And I just really loved the conversations that were happening at the table. I hope that this isn't just one of those check and done deals, that you'll talk about this at your dinner tonight, and also continue that dialogue into tomorrow's session for those of you who are going to attend. But just to summarize, diversity and inclusion cannot work unless it is clearly defined, unless it has executive ownership, which is all of you, unless it's anchored in business strategy. So each one of those key factors has to have a diversity component. HR does not own diversity. It does not. If you approach diversity in that manner, it's just set to fail right off the top. It's connected to talent strategy. So recruitment, hiring the best people, the most diverse work team that you can put together. That is the key in diversity and inclusion. You have to have it, again, clearly defined. I think I've said that at least 6 times during this talk. And then also, diversity needs to be clearly aligned with corporate culture. I have a video, and after that, Cliff is going to address the group as well in terms of diversity. Several of you asked me, you know, hey, Mona, you talked about your background, but where do you fall in? I'm going to keep it a secret until tomorrow's session so that you'll come back. So if you can cue that last video, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome to the 29th floor. I'm Noah Robichon. I'm here today with J.J. McCorvey, who wrote a feature for us about Tristan Walker, who is one of the most high-profile African-American entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley right now. He's also a champion of diversity in Silicon Valley, where we know there has been a big problem in terms of hiring practices and the employee makeup of companies like Google and Facebook and Apple. Talk to me about what it is about the culture of Silicon Valley startups right now that is making this problem worse, or at least, continuing this problem of lack of diversity in technology companies.
A common phrase that I kept hearing was unconscious bias. If you're someone who does not have much in common with the person who's hiring you, if you might not have come from the same place, then you don't have as good of a chance as some other people you're competing with for that job. Twitter, for example, has 2% of its entire workforce is black. Facebook has the same problem. Google, the magic number seems to be 2% overall.
You could be a great programmer, but if you don't like the same kind of music, or you don't like to go out to the same bars for a drink or something, that can actually sort of be part of what prevents you from getting the job or being part of that team. So what is Tristan doing to try and change this?
For one, he has a nonprofit called Code 2040, where he searches for Black and Latino engineering talent using his contacts, that he's amassed over his career in Silicon Valley, and connecting those students directly with jobs at Facebook and LinkedIn and Jawbone and companies like that. So that's one. The other way that it manifests is at his own company. And so when he's asking people for recommendations for candidates, he specifically asks them to first consider candidates of diverse race, because otherwise you're just going to be perpetuating the status quo.
Someone who is starting a company, who is an entrepreneur, what should they do in their own hiring practices, and what should they look for in talent to make a difference in terms of what it looks like right now?
Right. I mean, for one, the first step is to look around. Go beyond the typical networks that you're hiring from. Studies have shown that, on average, the average white American's social network is only 1% black. So if those are the people that you're relying on, if that's your only source of getting good recommendations for diverse candidates, you're not going to be very successful. Google has been notorious for only selecting candidates from top-tier tech schools, only pulling from Stanford. They want the Stanford engineers. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a problem when Stanford's black student population is single digit. They've told me that they're starting to go to historically black universities. It takes a conscious effort, to go outside of what Silicon Valley has typically pulled from, and also just start being more culturally tolerant and more curious about your employees and where they come from and how that can relate to the diversity of your customers as well.
JJ, thanks a lot for talking to me today. Have you had experience with unconscious bias, either in being hired or in your workplace as a cultural fit? We want to hear about it. Tweet us at Fast Company, hashtag 29th floor. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thank you all again for participating and for giving of your background and of your opinions so freely. Thank you for being honest about how you filled out the dots over here. We're going to collect all this data and prepare it for you and report back on Thursday. And then the D&I team is going to also take a look and see what you've put together in the SWOT, and also how Sonic values diversity. So this is just a building block for all of us. Nothing has been set in stone quite yet, but we really value this executive team's input into all of this. So thank you again. I'm going to turn it over to Cliff.